Welcome to Talking Industrial Automation, a podcast where you get to know the people who make modern industrial automation possible. You will get to hear from CSIA system integrators and industry partners to get a better understanding of how they help their clients solve process challenges and how they've earned success in their careers. Along the way, we will touch on system integration best practices, technology, trends, and challenges. Whether you are a manufacturer, end user, supplier, or system integrator, you will enjoy the insights these industry professionals bring to this podcast. Let's get started. Hi, my name is Lisa Richter, the host of Talking Industrial Automation, a podcast where you get to know the people who make modern industrial automation and processing possible. In today's episode, we're talking industrial automation with Adam Gluck, who was an early hire on Uber's driver engineering team and later was the founding engineer on Uber's engineering strategy team. At Uber, Adam worked on multiple rewrites of Uber's driver app, the processes to ship the driver app to millions of drivers each month, and helped redesign Uber's overall microservice architecture. He founded Copia to bring some of the same efficiencies to industrial automation as other engineering organizations. In addition, Forbes 30 Under 30 in 2022 recognized Adam in the category of manufacturing and industry. Adam, welcome to the podcast.
Super excited to be here. I'm excited for when Copia reaches a point where people forget that I worked at Uber.
You got to establish your bona fides, right?
Yeah. So hopefully soon we turn the corner,
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how you got here. Why did you choose this career in automation?
One thing that I often talk about is bits and atoms. So, one of the reasons I liked Uber when I joined in 2014 is one of the few companies where you could do pure software, but you were also moving things in the physical world. So for me, I was really excited by the vision of like, hey, we're going to make cities an order of magnitude more efficient. We're going to be able to move people and goods around. And, I was living in the south side of Chicago at the time. I could order an Uber and it would show up as opposed to taxis that wouldn't. That was really magical. So looking at all that, that was really exciting to me. But I still, even while I was at Uber, was kind of digging into where the actual core levers of how the economy actually functions, industrial base, automation. And so I was looking into a bunch of different ideas and just digging into the space more and more over 2 or 3 years. And it's actually kind of funny because I'll sometimes talk to startup founders and they're like, well, how'd you come up with the idea for Copia? Blah, blah, blah. And they're trying to look for a 2-month, now I can start a company thing. I'm like, nah, I just was digging into this for 3 years. I was traveling, I was doing a ton of stuff. And so it became really clear to me that there was going to be basically in 2018, 2019, that's been proven out a shift where we're going to reshore a lot of production that was going to be highly automated. I was looking into what was actually going to be reshored. I was looking into could I actually build a factory, and I think there's actually now we're seeing startups that are starting to do this where they'll take some processes that were generally inefficient or that sort of thing, and they'll make a hyper efficient factory that's extremely automated that they're getting a third of the cost basis or something like that to produce things. Anyway, but I was hey, there's actually all this code. And it seems like these processes that I'm familiar with at Uber are kind of missing the space, but I'm sure there's other things that people do here. And then I start talking to a bunch of folks at different manufacturing companies. I was why don't these processes exist? And they were we don't know. We think they should. And so I was okay, I'm not just making something up here in my head. And so that's kind of the entry point, and the rest has been history, but it really comes down to that kind of foundational, can we be solving hard problems that make the economy work better, that make the world a more efficient place?
So you were thinking about reshoring before the pandemic? Because that kind of sounds like a story.
Yeah, no, I was. Yeah. There's a bunch of trends that the pandemic just accelerated. China has a project called China 2025. And so basically they already realized the cost of cheap labor in China had become dramatically more expensive. And the US still had all the advanced manufacturing and it was highly automated. It's actually very clear that a lot of manufacturing is going to go out of China. And you can actually see that now in the economic numbers. And now the pandemic has just accelerated that. So it's kind of already happening. And then it was also, there's all this stuff going on and China's locked down and we actually need more redundancy in our supply chain and all that stuff. And that was kind of the reshoring and nearshoring. But I think the tailwinds were there earlier.
So if you have to describe to your mom what it is that you do, how do you do that?
It's actually funny you say this. My mom pitch is now the pitch I just always
Moms know best. Moms rule.
Moms know best. And I was actually sitting in a diner in Ann Arbor where I grew up. And my parents were like trying to explain what I did. And they kept trying to make it more complicated than it was. I was like, Mom, I'm working on something dumber than you think I'm working on. No, I'm just kidding. But, what I always say is like, when I finally said to them, I was like, look, there's a bunch of code that runs industrial sites. They run the assembly line, they run the robots, they run the sensors. There's more and more of that code over time. People make changes to that code. And when they make changes to it, they sometimes break things. We're building a set of processes and software that makes it so that when people make changes, they break things less often. And that's actually now how I talk about Copia to candidates, VCs, podcasters, and my parents.
So tell me a little bit more about how Copia began and the company evolved, because it's one thing to like have this great idea, but then actually executing it and following through and making it all happen. Tell me that story.
It's all about users at the end of the day and good builders at the earliest stages. So really good engineers who are going to build your software, and then talking to potential customers, people who are going to use your product, and so for us, like we just really like at the earliest stages, I did the initial prototype of Copia because I was an engineer. Then I hired another founding engineer and he just like read all my code and said he wanted to do it differently. And I was like, all right, man, fine, let's go at it. A lot of my job at that stage, and Matt Lee, who is our VP of BD, first hire co-founder, he was just talking to customers. And I remember at that time, especially because we are not from the space, we were saying a lot of this. I always used to say, tell me if I'm an idiot. You might even have people who listen to podcasts talk to me from this time. I was like, tell me if I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
I'd rather hear it from you than spend 2 years working on something. That is not a good idea.
Yeah, you're stress testing it.
Yeah, so I'd say I can take a punch. Just tell me if we're being stupid. And so we just started talking to people, and all those conversations were always turning out. People were like, nope, this is useful. Like, this is a real problem. And then from there, you identify there's a market and there's a problem. And then you're building the product, and the product's like trying to catch up with the problem. And that's what they call product market fit in startups, where it's like you have a product that fits into the market that you're selling to. And so we were just trying to build our product as fast as we could and get in customers' hands and get them using it and then see how they're using it. And that's like looking at engagement metrics. Are people using this product every day? It's also just like literally just getting into customers' hands and being like, do you like this or not? And so that's what we were doing at the earliest stages, just getting the product in people's hands and getting that really early feedback. And then from there, you're just building up, and you're always finding like more and more product market fit. You're building more and more features, and it matches more and more users. And, that process continues ideally forever. Really good companies are always listening to their customers, and they're listening to opportunities in the pipeline and trying to really understand what the market looks like. And they're building for that rapidly.
So another thing that's super interesting to me is this idea that I think of engineers as being sort of risk averse as a core kind of characteristic, but then they also can be entrepreneurs. So how do you make those two sort of opposing characteristics whole?
I think the really, truly best engineers are problem solvers above all else. And I think if you can explain a really clear problem that seems like it really should be fixed, engineers like can't help but work on those. And so for me, that's why I started the company. Like I had a very cozy job at Uber where I'd been there for 6 years. I knew everyone. My skip level was the CTO. I had an amazing manager. My team, I was working on like exactly what I dreamed I would work on when I was at Uber, which is like the overall Uber system architecture. I published a blog post. I made a whole career just talking about the architecture we built there. But for me, like this problem seems so important. And when I was talking to people in the space and people who are working on it, it's like, this seems like such an important problem that I want to wake up every day and do work. It's foundational. It's a pain that everyone in the industrial world experiences. Everyone does. And that's still what we see in our sales process. No one goes, this isn't a problem. Some people might say, this isn't the problem I want to prioritize today. We almost never talk to them about who goes, this is not a real problem. And so that was really exciting. And I felt like I had the skills to solve it. So when you see that combination of like, I can solve this and I can hire a team to solve it, I know how to do it, and it's a real problem, it's like you want to bite at that. So I think that was for me the case. And I think when engineers take a bet on our business, they're often people who actually like wanted to start a career, manufacturing or industrials. And they're like, the tools are not where I want it to be, or there seems like there's cooler stuff happening in IT or something like that. And at the moment they saw there's an opportunity to build some of these tools that exist in this kind of next part of the stack that we're calling industrial DevOps, people jump at it. So I can almost record an interview process. The first meeting is like, I used to work in this space. This is really good.
So talk to me a little bit about funding though. I mean, it's one thing to like decide you're going to start your own company and then you just eat baked beans every day, but how do you scale that?
So we fundraised. We've done multiple funding rounds now, raised a fair amount of money. I really do think a lot of it comes down to like real clarity on a real problem in an important market. And it's kind of an exciting thing to think about life, right? It's like the things that are the most important, hardest problems people want to fund and work on. Like that says something good about human nature, maybe. But like for me, when I talk about Copia, it's like, how can you make the problem really clear? And so if you're talking to an external investor, it's the mom pitch that you just made me give.
Yeah.
Right. Where it's like, okay, really what is happening in this market? You know what I mean? Because it's hard to unwrap. Like the layers of the stack that we live in is really hard to unwrap and get to really see it really quickly. And so a lot of the challenge there is like, how do you get people to really understand the problem, understand it's a real problem, and understand it's a really big problem? And if you can do all of that, given the size of the market and the fact that every industrial company in the world uses this tool chain, I actually now call it the world's largest market. $16 trillion global industrial economy. I say it's the world's largest market. I don't know. I actually should go check to see if that's true. That's true.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it sounds good, right? Yeah. So that's what I say, the world's largest market. And then, I can go argue the tit for tat.
Yeah.
But, maybe I should go Google that actually. I started saying that recently. But that's the big thing, in my mind is like, it's always comes down to like clarity of the problem. And every stage of business too is like, what are the biggest problems we're facing? And it's hard because it's like you get bigger and you're like, still, what's the one big thing we need to get? You always have limited resources you're solving. So how do you actually say, what do you need to get right in the problem? That's kind of the funding piece. And then just finding really good investors who understand the space. Like we're really lucky. We have Construct Capital, Lux, Iron Spring. There's another fund, Renegade, that came into our business, and they invest a lot in hard industries. And there's not that many investors who do ultimately. And they have to be a little bit more patient than the average investor because industrials move more methodologically and have a more conservative buying pattern. I mean, I say it just makes sense given the scope and the scale of what they're working on. So it's not like a dig, but that's just like it moves a little slower than if you're a startup selling to sales teams, marketing teams, or something like that. Because engineers need to diligence this stuff and make sure it works. And there's a huge number of technical requirements in the space that you need to match. And so you need investors in the business who understand what that looks like and are comfortable with that as you're scaling up the business.
So tell me a little bit more about how Copia has grown, maybe quantify it a little bit, and what you expect for the company in the next year or two.
I'm actually extremely optimistic right now. I actually just gave a really energetic conversation yesterday. It's kind of funny because like, I think in the CEO role, I was kind of joking, you're always 6 to 12 months ahead in your head of where the business is from where everyone else is. So I'll sit there and be like, we're killing it. We're killing it. Everyone's like, we're doing the work right now. Like I'm like, I just had my coffee. Like I just had this, I just on a podcast and I just said this, and it's like, everyone's like, yeah, Adam, we need this to actually work. Like, what can you get out here? So that's kind of the vibe. But it's good to see what the light at the end of the tunnel. And for me, I'm like, and I actually posted about this the other day, the gap between demo and something that works at scale in production in the industrial space is very, very large. And actually all the material requirements of industrial environments are very, very hard. And so what that looks like for a product like ours is we have to support a bunch of different vendors because we're a multi-vendor solution. We're not useful if we're just supporting one vendor because you can actually buy, something from the existing vendors or whatever for just one vendor. And those might make more sense. We need to be multi-vendor. That's the white space in the market that we actually inhabit. And getting to deep enough vendor support and wide enough vendor support is hard. And I think we're going to turn the corner on that in the next month or two. We have like 1 or 2 vendors that we're shipping. Our ideal customer profile, the core of the market that we're targeting right now, we can ship a vendor matrix that matches their requirements. Enterprise readiness, that's SSO, but there's a lot of things enterprises ask for that don't happen in your first 2 days of building the product. We spent years working with enterprises. I think, we mentioned ahead of this that, Amazon is a customer of ours. They published a case study about the work we've done working with Fortune 2 company, with the world's largest scale. That's enterprise ready, secure. We're SOC 2 Type 2 compliant. We get audited every year. Most startups, again, don't do that at this stage, but you need to do that. And it actually changes our entire processes of how we function. It does slow down the business in some ways and we have to work around making sure that we can maintain velocity, but we still put that as a top priority. Scale. I think we're the only company that has an industrial DevOps solution that's operated at any sort of real scale. And so you look at Amazon and what we're doing there, and it's actually real scale. And Amazon's a huge business. I always say Amazon's like 8 enterprises in one. So you're looking at very real scale there. And then we're cloud-based and we're multi-cloud. So we can deploy in a customer's enterprise, AWS, Azure, GCP, and then also our public cloud. And again, it's secure, right? So you look at all that, that's hard engineering. Even we have like 18 engineers at the company, 18, 20. I'm like, even for a 20-person engineering team, that's almost like we list all those material requirements. That's like one per engineer. And there's like still a bunch of features we have to support on top. So it's really hard. Day-to-day execution is like incredibly focused from the team. But the other side of this is like, if you're going to build a vision like ours, which I believe is actually fundamentally a new category. And if you look at like ERP, MES, I believe every company in the world in the next 10 years can and will have an industrial DevOps stack in their business. I want that to be Copia. If you're going to realize that vision, you have to do all those things. And it's been really, really hard to get there. But I think that we're turning the corner in terms of building a solution that we can deploy to many, many enterprises that solves the material requirements of these environments and actually generates the value that we're promising on that product market fit stuff I was talking to. And I think we're going to have the best solution in the market, hands down. And I'm actually very excited when I look at our pipeline and the customers and types of customers we're talking to, where I'm like, we can have an incredible impact on organizations. And I think that will be foundational. So I expect over the next year or two, it's going to be working with some of the world's best manufacturers, industrial companies, to build a solution that actually will transform their operations and change what it is to be a controls engineer in those organizations.
Are you planning on joining your colleagues for the 2024 CSIA conference, April 15th through the 19th? I hope so, because this year's event has some new features I think you're really going to enjoy. For starters, CSIA is inviting the next generation of leaders to attend this conference that explores not just the present state of the industry, but the future as well. In fact, there is a whole track devoted to emerging leaders, plus dedicated networking time. Don't worry, you'll still find plenty for the current leaders, like the second annual Business as an Investment workshop, as well as the classic Best Practices workshop. On a personal note, though, I'm most excited about the brand new workshop called A Strategy for Success: How to Build the Ultimate SI Marketing Playbook. It's a topic I'm personally super passionate about, but also, to be honest, I helped plan it. And we designed my dream workshop. Ultra practical, extremely hands-on, highly entertaining. Finally, the keynote speaker lineup is pretty special this year. From a literal rock star to a business makeover expert to an EOS implementer. Where else are you going to get that? You can explore it all at www.controlsys.org/conference 2024. And remember, the sooner you sign up, the more you save. So smash that register button. See you in Dallas. Tell me a little bit more about what's unique about how you might approach a project.
I just paint a really big vision. We like to be really pragmatic as an organization. And it's actually funny because I'll talk to a C-level and I'll talk to a controls engineer. I'll talk to a C-level I get introduced to, a controls engineer at a trade show. I think to have an effective product in any space where you're selling to an engineer, it needs to solve multiple layers of value. And I talk about this a lot. I was on a podcast where I was saying how I don't like the term industry 4.0 because I think it's too top down. I got a little bit cast as the villain of I don't I'm fine, whatever. But it's still a fun conversation. Devil's advocate. But I think if you look at our product, top level, we're talking to a CIO or a director of automation. It's about governance and controls processes. It's who can touch your code and do you have good process to make sure that people aren't changing things without you having visibility into it. And that's hypercritical. If you're talking to a controls engineer, though, or someone who's actually at the plant level, you have to be adding value to them. And so for us, it's like the rendering, the browser-based experience, hey, look, the average experience is something breaks right now in an industrial company and it's 2 a.m. as you get into your car and you drive to a site that might be 2 miles out if you're maintaining 4 sites in a region, 2 hours out. So you're going there and then you have to connect the network just to get your file to start thinking about what may be changed. And, that's insane. So I keep saying to Andrea that I want a video of someone waking up in bed and looking at on their cell phone because they got an alert that something changed. That's the reality. Is actually fundamentally changes for those engineers. So you have a little bit of that feature function that's really valuable. And so for us, we try and look at every layer of the solution, really make sure we're adding value across the stack of people who might be involved with a solution like this. And we don't get organ rejection because individual engineers don't like the solution, but we're also not getting top-down people being I don't get why this is valuable and I don't know why people are excited about it. And getting that right is really challenging. And then when we come into a project, it's very much figuring out the areas of value add and making sure we're like brick by brick building up value in the organization.
Yeah. So you're just making sure that you're speaking to the pain points of the particular audience that you're dealing with at the moment. So for context too, you mentioned Andrea, she's your director of head of marketing, I think the official title is. So
yeah, she's head of marketing. Yeah.
Not everybody knows you and your team on a first name basis. So I just wanted to put that out there. All right. So tell me about a project that was super challenging and how you solved the problem.
I think Amazon case study is nice because we have it out there. I talked about some pieces of the challenges of working with like a top tier enterprise, earlier, but it's like the scale. How do you actually scale to a lot of sites? Actually, even just onboarding them, we got to the point where we're like onboarding a site every day. How do you scale like the architecture? Our solution's cloud-based. So it's like we were deploying, in their infrastructure and scaling there on AWS, the material requirements around security, making sure that we're like secure at a level that, a company like Amazon operates at. Enterprise ready. There's a lot of enterprise user management type features that were actually really critical for a deployment like that. So, you kind of look at it and it's like in that gap between like demo code and code that works in production at enterprise scale. And I think in working with Amazon over the last year or two, we've done a lot of work to fill that gap. And that a lot of that is in the case study. So that's been really awesome.
What are some of the challenges your customers are facing? I mean, we've kind of talked about a little bit about it, but what else can you say about that?
The way that I actually talk about this, and I stole this, I don't know if you know John Pillar, I stole this from him. He like was a early kind of person that we talked to quite a lot about the business, but he used the phrase like cowboys and firefighters. And so I think a lot of the industrial space right now suffers from actually a few different things. It starts with cowboys and firefighters. And what I mean by that is the people who shoot from the hip in industrial environments, and then people put out fires. So you have basically this kind of, I'd say toxic, almost like maintenance process where it's like, and this is true in the software IT space as well. There's data on it. As I adopted DevOps solutions, you get the switch from like putting out fires to having a good process for making changes and working on new features and that sort of thing. I think endemic in this space right now is this cowboy firefighter cycle. And then on top of that, you get a culture, I think in many environments of blame. And the reason that you blame is because you don't have the right tools and processes to have a blameless postmortem, right? If you have a cowboys and firefighters, all you can do is like you shot from the hip and you missed, we're firing you now. You know what I mean? And the labor market's gotten better, but really when we started, it was like really bad. And so if you go on like PLC forums, you're talking to anyone, there's all these jokes about how controls engineers get kind of stuck in this like who broke the thing. And it's like because the controls engineers own the code and also the electrical engineering, they understand the mechanical, they're often getting the finger pointed at them. For us, I view industrial DevOps as breaking that cycle of maintenance, of the like putting out fires, of treating controls engineers like their maintenance as opposed to treating them like strategic value add. And building, the possibility to have like a blameless postmortem where you're instead of like actually blaming individuals, you're saying, well, where did our process break down? Oh, well, we don't code review. So you're just asking this person to write some code and ship it into the device and you're not having anyone look at it. You're not giving them any support. That's horrible. You're going to yell at them if they break something and they're not getting the right tools in place to like help review their code and they've just been doing the job for that's terrible. But instead of that, we have a culture that's like, well, that person messed up. Like, you know what I mean? And it's like, how do we teach this so that we have blameless postmortems? And companies do. There's great companies out there. I'm not saying that, but blameless postmortem, you're actually supporting people. When something goes wrong, you're improving your process, your governance and control. You're making it so that actually you have the tools to do this the right way. And that I think breaks that cycle. And I think that's endemic in this space. And so when I look at the actual value, that's very often talked about switching from controls engineering viewed as a maintenance cost center to strategic value add. And the best companies in the world view controls and industrial engineering that way because they realize they can change the scale and scope of their production if they invest in those engineers. And I want to break that endemic tendency not to do that in this space by bringing better tools and unlocking that creative capacity.
So talk a little bit more about the trends you're seeing in the space right now.
So I think it's interesting. I think I've been talking about this a lot recently. I think the last decade was really defined by connectivity projects. It's interesting because we've just now, in the last like 6 to 12 months, started to hear people when they don't have connected sites and they're really big manufacturers, they'll say we're behind. So it's a little bit of a shift from like, why are we doing this to now the people that didn't do it are like feeling the pain a little bit. And I think it's interesting because like what that looks like over the last decade is there's people who are just connecting devices and that was their whole project and they didn't really know why. They just knew that something might be there on the other side of it. But I think now we're starting to see a shift where like the best people are figuring out how to get value out of those connected devices. I remember very distinctly at a trade show hearing a talk where someone was like, hey, I was connecting all these devices. And then finally my VP was like, okay, what are we doing with all this?
Yeah.
And I'm sure those conversations happened. And then people start pulling data out and people are like, well, what are we doing with all this data? And now people are getting to good insights. They're figuring out, I think what I'm starting to see is people are actually getting good at the digital manufacturing stuff. They figure out how to build concrete use cases. They figure out how to generate value at the plant level. And some people are really doing it. And those people are winning. And most of those are companies that are winning in their markets, right? So basically from a trend standpoint, I think we're going to see the end of that connectivity curve over the next 5 years. I think companies are really feeling it who didn't adopt that. I think part of that looks like some amount of cloud adoption, but I also think cloud has gotten more intelligent. And I often say it's based on latency, but the understanding of where your logic sits between cloud architecture and edge architecture and PLCs and actually like true edge, the edge of the edge, say. So understanding where does your logic sit across those things is going to become a really important like kind of set of decisions as we have these connected sites and better APIs and all that stuff. So I think we're in a really exciting time where the best companies in the world will leverage all of this technology in order to do things that they couldn't do before to unlock capability. We're going to start seeing like a change in the scale and scope of production. Other tailwinds, obviously, that I think especially SIs and machine builders and that sort of thing actually are really have visibility into right now is a lot of companies need to automate a lot more. So, you have this kind of like also recruiting kind of headwind for these organizations where we have 1 million job openings in manufacturing. We've had a job market for years now, and it's hard to fill these roles. So it's moved from like a CapEx automation story to a automate or die situation. And so that's really exciting. I even often bring this up, like even if you look at mid-market, like there are PE firms that will look at two companies that produce the same thing and they'll say one requires 7 people to do it, another one requires 2 people to do it, and it impacts like owner's ability to exit the business, at some point. So it's a hyper critical thing at this point in order to automate. There's a really cool company in Europe that just got funded for a Series B called Robco. And their whole thing is finding like middle manufacturers in Germany and actually like helping them set up automation. So there's also this like catch up too of the kind of middle of the market that happen as well. So I think all of that are positive tailwinds ultimately. And I think it's going to be like, we'll see our entire industrial basis unless like completely automate it in the next 10, 20 years.
What about the reshoring efforts, since you predicted that before? Since you're OG on that prediction.
Yeah, since I'm OG. I mean, you see a few things. I think China 2025 stuff, they saw this before we did and had a plan in 2015 to bring more advanced manufacturing in China. Clearly, they've done that within particular verticals. I think the one that people talk about a lot is China EV and American competitiveness with China EV. I want to win. I'm excited for American EV, and I think we can win. And I believe in the American industrial sector to be robust. And I believe in ultimately capitalism to beat out against central planning. Sorry, not to be a mid 20th century American industrialist, but I think we'll crush. I think within 5 to 10 years, we'll figure it out. And I have my conviction on that, but we need to work hard. You know what I mean? Like we need to win. We need to have a play to win mentality there. But I think we can win. And then on top of that, we still owned a lot of advanced manufacturing. I don't think we're coming into this from a point of weakness. I actually hate when people use the phrase rebuild the manufacturing economy, because I think people who've been in it for the last 20 years know that there's been a lot of manufacturing going on. So for me, I like to say, like, what is the next generation of industrial automation and manufacturing, and how do we build things that can build better things? That's the exciting thing for me. But I do think we'll reshore. I think a lot of production will come out of China, partly because of politics there, partly because just economic trends that I mentioned earlier, especially increased labor costs. I also think we're going to start seeing like industries that were hard to automate historically automate more. So like the fact that like, textiles and shoe production, that sort of thing, where we needed cheap pools of labor. I think we're starting to see some of that might get automated as well. So I think even the need for a cheap labor pool that China was kind of capitalizing on is going to go away. And we're just going to run out of global cheap labor pools as well. You see China like outsourcing to Africa and Indonesia, but there's not that much big pool of cheap labor, which is exciting for automators, right? Because it's like in the day, it's like, it's going to just be at a global level. I think within the next 50 years, like automate or die. So it's like we have this ability to actually build amazing production and amazing tools, So I'm pretty jazzed, as you can tell. Stuff, and I think we have an opportunity to build amazing things.
For me, I'm a little bit more pessimistic. This term late stage capitalism eats at me. And I'm just in my head, like, how can they sell this for that price? Just shipping alone must cost them that price. So I think I'm a little bit more nervous about the world.
Well, they first started using the term late stage capitalism in the early 20th century. So, not to say there won't be something afterwards. But, I don't know. All I can say, it's built into the term Copia, which is like, let's be able to build more things at scale at higher quality. And I think that's like a net improvement, for human experience.
With thousands of qualified integrators and suppliers, the CSIA Industrial Automation Exchange is your one-stop spot to identify and connect with a diverse community of integrators and suppliers to help you deliver a low-risk and successful project. Using this powerful platform, you can do customized searches and filter by industry vertical, expertise, location, certifications, and more to source the right partners and products for your needs. For SIs and partners, it provides a platform to support your content and SEO marketing efforts, position yourself as a thought leader, and nurture prospects during their complicated buyer's journey. Why not take a minute to visit www.csiaexchange.com and see for yourself? No swiping left, no swiping right. Just connect directly to quality industry experts. It's really that simple, I promise. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing the automation marketplace?
I really do think this thing I was talking about earlier, where I think over the last 20, 30 years, MBAs have viewed, controls engineering as a cost center and did not invest in it in the right way in organizations. And that has put some set of companies at a bad strategic footing, is a really big problem. And this is something I think Silicon Valley gets right, which is like Silicon Valley companies tend to view engineering as like hyper important. And they'll talk about like the prima donna engineer, that is like requires all this, like, you're like rolling out the carpet for them as they're coming into the office and sprinkling, rose water on them. I think that used to be how other parts of the US operate around engineering. They viewed as a hypercritical talent, but we did kind of this financialization. I think it's also why we don't have a redundant supply chain, right? Because you have this kind of bidding process for single source suppliers and all this stuff, because you could get a 10% discount somewhere. And these people basically like took the pie, and instead of growing it, continue to innovate, they like cut it up and try to make it more efficient. And I think it's like you grow or die, in our system. So I think if we can shift the mentality and have companies really value engineering as a fundamental skill set and invest in engineers and invest in engineering, invest in more training for engineers. And I think that's not going to just happen from a like top-down program. We need like the best manufacturers in the world to be like, who in my community can I train to do this stuff? We have I think one of the biggest things that always comes out is like shortage of engineers. It's like, how do you train people to do this? Like, we need to solve this and solve it fast, and then invest in those people and grow them aggressively so that they're the best in the world at what they do. And give them the tools selfishly, but give them the tools, so that they can do an excellent job at their role. And that's how we win. And that's how the companies win. And that's how people make money and they grow fast. To me, that's the biggest challenge, is like we need to break this like toxic cycle of viewing engineering as a cost center or a maintenance center, or just work the engineers 10 more hours, because that's failed now.
So you've talked about you're being a little bit optimistic about things in general, but speak to me a little bit more about what makes you optimistic about the future of the industry.
I think the energy is really amazing. Like anytime I go to a trade show, I'm like, this is actually like, it's really buzzy. It's incredible. The tech that you're seeing come out is super exciting. We're really lucky in terms of the people that we work with. I think a lot of our companies are like some of the best manufacturers in the world, or they're industrial individuals who are like really excited about the future of the industrial space. So I'm biased maybe as a sampling challenge, But when I look at what these companies are doing, the scale and the scope of the problems that they're taking on, I think it's just amazing. I think the things that we're going to see are really exciting there. And I think that does come out when you're looking at these trade shows. I think some of the other stuff that's making me optimistic is like 4 or 5 years ago, a lot of this digital manufacturing stuff still felt really speculative. I felt like a little bit like buzzword soup, but I think there's people who have like managed to boil it into things that are actually useful. So I think that's really exciting. But generally speaking, I feel like the energy is all there. And then if you look at just like the secular trends in the data, it's like we're investing a lot more. And like literally you can just look month over month, we're spending a lot more on industrial infrastructure in the country. It's just like an insane amount of money. part of that, again, is political, like CHIPS Act, IRA, that there's like huge need for geopolitical reasons to invest in these. Defense tech has become really big again as well. You see companies that are more on the startup, so like Endural and that sort of thing, that are starting to scale production. And so you get into these really exciting, like we're building a lot from early stage to the most advanced, largest manufacturers. Everyone's innovating, everyone's excited. I think it's like we're really have an opportunity to build something awesome here, and we should capture the tailwinds right now and do some great work.
Tell me what you think about AI, because I am so conflicted about it. Tell me what you think.
AI in the physical environment is still something that's like kind of an unsolved problem. I don't think AI is like a hype train. I think it's very real technology that's getting very good. And I think it's transformational. I think it's really good. I'm not a big AI warrior personally. Maybe that goes to my general optimism. I also don't actually think AGI is going to exist. I think it's going to be like a weird uncanny valley sort of thing, because it's not been like proven that they say like you can't compute consciousness, so it's like you kind of get this question of like, can you take all these computers and like make a brain that works like ours, that has moral reasoning and all that stuff? And the answer is like really out. So you could have a really big brain that's good at synthesizing data that doesn't like become conscious, like intuitive. Like, jury's still out on that. We'll see. But I think we might get a little bit of an uncanny valley thing, where it's like, oh, it kind of feels like they're conscious, but they're actually not. And it's like, we don't know how to deal with it. Then we're again alone in the universe, which maybe is depressing in its own way. So there's that piece. I mean, I think AI in terms of like a tool that's used in manufacturing industrials, I'm really curious to see how that plays out. Like I know some people are trying to I've heard of companies using like AI to like trying to own some process logic. That seems too non-deterministic to me to like really do that sort of thing. I think like better analysis tools, I think like copilots and that sort of thing in the industrial space are going to be like a pretty clear set of things to do. That's like where we often look at it is like, can we tell you about your code changes? Can we tell you what's happening in your environment? Like I like to think about the computer from Star Trek. Yeah. Be like, wait, there was just an outage. What was the temperature and humidity in the sector 3? And they'll be like, oh, this was like that's sort of like you're like talking to the computer to solve problems. Like that's the future I see that I'm excited about. All that stuff. I think it's going to be really interesting. I think it'll be a huge step up for productivity overall. That's all that. One other thing I'll talk about is like embodied AI. There's a big funding announcement for that company Figure. I think industrials are an interesting go-to-market use case for embodied AI, just because it's like kind of the human environments that's least designed for humans is an industrial environment. So I'm like, I actually think that like a humanoid form factor might be really good for like us having a personal assistant in our home. Yeah. But I'm actually curious, and I think a lot of people who are in the industrial automation space, I'm curious to see where this conversation comes out. Is like, why would I need this like slow humanoid robot in an industrial environment? Like, wouldn't I want a high throughput, robotic arm or something, I don't know, or another device that just does this thing more specifically. So I'm curious to see how like embodied robots impact automation. It might be useful in those sectors with flexible requirements over time. Like I was talking about earlier, that would probably rely on large labor pools, but I'm kind of curious to see how it impacts like a high throughput manufacturing environment. Like how does it get used on a, automotive line or something like that?
There are a lot of dirty and dangerous jobs everywhere, whether it's at home or in the factory, that I would prefer something else do. So for sure.
I agree. Yeah. I'm just curious if that's like a robot or like a more specialized, production cell or something like that.
So switching topics completely, I want to ask you about our upcoming conference in April. Are you going? And if so, what are you looking forward to?
Oh, wow. I'll ask Andrea if I'm going or not. I don't know what part of the marketing budget I'm using. I've attended in the past. Literally at this point, people just book things on my calendar. Yeah. So I have to go look. But I may be there. But so what am I looking for if I?
Yeah. I mean, if you have attended in the past, what did you find particularly useful about attending?
Overall, I think it's great. It was a really good conference. It was super exciting. Again, part of the like buzzy, high energy that I get comes often from those conferences and attending them. And that transfer of knowledge is really important between organizations. And I think when I was at CSIA last, it was like there's a lot of people there. Really strong community that I felt when I was there. People who've worked with each other and know each other for a really long time. And a lot of those companies are like, top of their field in terms of best practices and, the ability to kind of share that between people, the camaraderie, the relationships that form over time. Like if I were a system integrator, I would attend that conference every single year. And then us as a sponsor of the conference and someone that likes to come to it a lot, very excited to be part of that community from a vendor standpoint as well. So I think it's incredibly impactful. If everyone's listening to this podcast, they're on the fence about going to the SI conference and they are an SI, you should definitely go, because I think it will up-level people's businesses. I think it'll give them new contacts. I think it'll help expose them to what's happening in the space. The variety of companies is incredible. I just think it's net extremely good environment to be a part of. So I cannot say enough. I had a lot of fun, at the CSIA conference last time I was there. So it was a really good time.
Okay, another completely different topic. If you had to choose an entirely different career, what would it be?
The other thing that I was kind of set up to do at one point was just be an academic. So that was kind of the choice. My dad is a PhD, and I was kind of lined up to do that a little bit. I mean, for me, I ended up kind of moving towards something more practical. I just reading books all the time was I like to do that, but I don't like it to be my job maybe. But I think being an academic could be really interesting. I think some of the stuff, I mentioned, I have a friend who's a staffer, and is doing some of that stuff, policy could be super interesting to me as well. I tend to find that as I have been getting older, more and more compelling, where it's how do we actually make laws and that sort of thing? That's really, if I was going to just make up fantasies about what I was going to do, So I mean, I think that stuff is compelling.
So final question. This is a hilarious question for you because you're so young. I mean, normally I'm talking to people who are a little bit older, and so they've had some time to think about this. But if you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself just getting started?
I mean, I had a really good time at Uber, but I think I think I did it mostly, but just hyper orientation on the problems I found the most impactful, at all times. I think I've done a fairly good job of that. I think, for me, I go back and forth a little bit. I had a really good time at Uber, but I'm should I have just worked on a company earlier? Starting a company is really hard. And it is a skill set unto itself. And I'm oh, that learning curve, I could have started even earlier, and I'd be smarter and better at what I'm doing now if I had done that earlier. And so I have a little bit of that. But on the flip side, I learned a ton at Uber that you don't get from starting a company. And also I was debating that at the time, and I felt like a crazy decision to start a company when I was 22, and it probably would have been given the emotional development and skills you have and all that stuff. So, it's easy to do hindsight's 2020, type deal. But if I were to think about anything, it's just being even more hyper focused. I think there's also times where I was a little bit maybe cynical about things, and I think it never worked out well. So maybe that's more my optimism. So for example, cryptocurrency, I knew about it in 2014. I'm always well, if I just put $1,000 into Bitcoin in 2014, I had a friend in 2011 who was talking about it. So I knew about some of these tech things, and I was it just was that seems weird to me. I would talk to some weird crypto guy, and he'd be saying oh, it's the future. It's what blogs did to the media.
Yeah.
Crypto's gonna do the things. I'd be I don't know who the heck you are. You're weird.
Yeah, it's very speculative.
It seemed really speculative to me. And I'm oh, all those people just got really rich. I don't know. They seem like they did well.
Did they though?
Yeah. Well, in spirit, in soul, I'm not sure, but there's some of that stuff where I'm there's times where I think I was a little cynical, or even people are talking about machine learning and all this stuff, in the 2010s, I was that doesn't work. It's all BS. And then I'm oh, actually, it turned out it worked. So I think of anything that's trained me looking forward to be just don't be cynical. There are things that you can invest in, have an optimistic outlook, and just try and build cool stuff, and if you can build things, you can be part of creating those things and solving those problems.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Talking Industrial Automation. If you are interested in learning more about Adam or Copia, you can find them on the Industrial Automation Exchange at www.csiexchange.com. Thanks for listening, and thank you, Adam, for joining me today. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also really help the show by leaving a review and sharing with colleagues. We're all just slaves to the logarithm now, so I gotta ask. Thanks for listening to the Talking Industrial Automation podcast. Thanks also to bensound.com and Wistia for the music bumpers. Until next time.